Armed troops descend upon a snow-covered, deserted apartment complex as strange, distorted creatures snarl at the heavens. From the ruins of this structure, a lone human figure emerges. Blood-smeared and stumbling through the snow, a helicopter above tracks his every step as soldiers on the bridge get ready to fire. Despite numerous shots to his chest, he casually brushes them off and keeps moving. We then rewind a month to a world transformed. Verdant greens envelop the landscape, and distant crickets chirp. Our main character, Cha Hyun-soo, arrives in the town. He lives alone and appears withdrawn, keeping a distance from the maintenance man mowing the lawn. Inside his darkened apartment, he sits in solitude as curtains flutter and police sirens wail outside. Wrestling with thoughts of ending his life, Hyun-soo eventually climbs to the rooftop and peers over the edge. He's interrupted by a girl across the building, Lee Eun-yu, practicing ballet moves. She steps in chewing gum and, after questioning Hyun-soo about his actions, advises him against ending his life, noting it would cause significant trouble for everyone else in the building. Downstairs, the security guard is reprimanded by his superior for setting up a bed in the office. He receives a food package, claiming the fish inside is for a resident. As he opens the container, his nose begins to bleed profusely, and he clutches it in pain. After tending to his wound, he greets Hyun-soo, who returns to his apartment, but not before handing him a beer as a peace offering. Something seems off about this man, and Hyun-soo senses it, peeking through the peephole to see what he's up to. Meanwhile, Jisoo sits in her room, smoking before heading out to work. With a bass guitar slung on her back, she waits for the elevator and encounters another resident, a peculiar woman pushing an empty pram. Jisoo soon discovers that the woman is dealing with grief as Jung Jae-hoon introduces himself in the hallway. A Korean language teacher with strong religious beliefs, Jae-hoon is one of the building's more intriguing residents. Other residents include the shady Pyeon Sang-wook, who smokes in his room while torturing someone bound in tape on the floor. Sang-wook extinguishes his cigarette in the man's mouth as he struggles to breathe. Hyun-soo learns he's been chosen to test an upcoming game remake and is instructed to go to G-Tower on August 25th. Coincidentally, that's the date marked in his calendar. That evening, Hyun-soo heads out to collect his package, but finds a trail of blood and ramyeon noodles leading to a woman crying for help. Frightened, Hyun-soo retreats to his room, but eventually interacts with his neighbor at the door. She insists her cat is missing and begs him to open up. When he asks to see her arms, she becomes hysterical and flees, with blood streaming from her nose. As Hyun-soo steps outside, he discovers the girl is gone. He collapses in front of Sang-wook, who is outside Jisoo's door, and manages to bend the metal. Jisoo, unsure of what else to do, grabs a baseball bat. With the security guard absent, doors locked, and a killer on the loose, the residents converge in the main atrium to devise a plan. They eventually break into the manager's office, where firefighter Yi Kyung tries to call emergency services, but finds them overwhelmed. With phone lines down and emergency lights unintentionally turned on, they inadvertently open the main gates. This proves disastrous as they encounter a bizarre creature outside. With its mouth wide open and a twisting tentacle smashing through the glass, it evokes memories of Resident Evil's monsters as it goes on a rampage. Eun-hyuk seizes a fire extinguisher and takes charge, directing everyone to close the shutters and fend off the creature. It's a tense moment as Ji-kyung pushes the creature back just in time. As the residents regroup, they realize the outside world has been overrun by these creatures. When one of the creatures growls protein, the residents inside the apartment complex understand that their world has irrevocably changed. Back in his room, Hyun-soo starts bleeding heavily from his nose. We begin episode 2 with a look at 19-year-old Hyun-soo back at home, with scars up his arm, seemingly hinting at self-harming. He continues to play video games and disregards his mother's pleas to head out for a family trip. His behavior is clearly dividing the family, but as they argue in the car, his father starts bleeding profusely from the nose and passes out, subsequently crashing the car. As the only one of his family to survive, Hyun-soo is given 30 million won, but berates the trivial amount of money he's left with. This catches us up to the present as Sang-wook is attacked on the stairwell by the deranged girl from before. After biting a chunk out of his back, he beats the girl down, leaving her in a bloody mess. Meanwhile, Soo-ung helps Yi-kyung move the corpse from the hallway and eventually sends a picture of him to his family. Down in the basement, however, Jisoo finds a security guard laughing and calling out for manager Han. As blood gushes down his face, she instinctively smacks the man before Yoon-hyuk saves her from her ordeal. In the midst of all this chaos, the residents all receive an emergency message confirming what's happening outside. As they check the news, they realize that this disease is nationwide, and right now they're in damage control mode. The creature on the stairs stands back up again, twisting and contorting as it begins ascending the stairs toward the other residents. In the main atrium, the group gathers to try to figure out what to do and contemplate whether they should all reconvene on the 7th floor or not. Fighting inevitably breaks out as everyone begins disagreeing over the best course of action. The arrival of Sang-wook soon changes the dynamic of the room. Given he's been bitten, the other residents cower away from him before he's eventually tasered and knocked out on the ground. 8 hours later, Hyun-soo struggles to keep his nose from bleeding. He heads online and sees numerous people talking about this disease and how they're calling it a curse. No one seems to know where it originated from, and given the rate it's spreading, it seems unlikely they'll find a solution that won't result in many people dying. Unfortunately, the internet connection is severed and goes down before he can get a chance to research further. Hyun-soo accidentally lets the creature into his room, which looks more like an overgrown gremlin now. It seems to have heightened hearing and is missing half its head. It's a tense affair, to say the least, as it stumbles around the room while Hyun-soo holds his nerve long enough to see this creature eventually stumble away. With Sang-wook tied up and held behind shutters, Seung-wan turns to Suk-hyun for answers, given he's their makeshift leader now. Armed with a knife and a gas mask, he heads in intending to stab Sang-wook but hesitates. It's a long enough pause for Sang-wook to headbutt Suk-hyun square in the face. Meanwhile, Jae-hoon and Ji-soo find the beaten man in the elevator. The former obviously knows he's the captive of Sang-wook, but for now decides against saying anything. Armed with a hammer, he joins them on the hunt. Elsewhere, the rest of the group contemplates whether to leave and head for the daycare center or stay there for the time being. Although the director, Jin-ok, is against the idea, Yoon-hyuk coolly shuts down her argument and eventually walks away. Up in one of the rooms, a resident hangs himself, which brings back bad memories for Ji-soo, who remembers seeing a face from her past doing the exact same thing. Whoever it was, they left a post-it note telling her that the guitar is hers now. Hyun-soo makes a bold decision to help out a resident in the apartment block below. A giant eyeball attached to a tentacle heads up the building and wraps around, squeezing him tightly. This happens to give his neighbor Do-sik enough time to sever the eyeball and save Hyun-soo's life before it's too late. Together, they decide to team up and save the kids. Knowing that his phone can attract the monsters, he prepares to head out and meets Do-sik at his apartment. It turns out he's in a wheelchair and has a pretty nifty set of tools to use too. However, he warns Hyun-soo about taking the monsters face-to-face and encourages him to play more tactically. This plays out in the form of a bouncy ball used as a distraction for the half-headed gremlin creature. Hyun-soo manages to sneak up behind the creature and electrocute it with his makeshift spear. Suk-hyun, meanwhile, makes his way into the convenience store where Yi-kyung happens to be too. The food inside the store is literally all they have left, and both Yi-kyung and Yoon-hyuk are well aware of that. In fact, both of them start to work out exactly how to ration the food and make it last if they're going to be stuck in there for a while. Suk-hyun, though, is not willing to share anything. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo charges down the hallway and manages to make it to the two kids as they realize their father has passed away. Unfortunately, things take a turn for the worse when Hyun-soo's condition worsens and he begins bleeding profusely from the nose again. Only this time, his eyes are blackened. Episode 3 starts with a repeat of the family trip from before, but this time, Hyun-soo is in the car, telling his parents they should die. All of this is a bad dream, of course, and as the shadow version of himself stares back menacingly in a mirror, Hyun-soo awakens with a start. However, he still has darkened eyes. This is only made worse by another monster showing up at the apartment, smashing the walls to bits and trying to get to the kids. Ji-soo and Jae-hoon overhear the commotion and arrive behind Hyun-soo to try and take down the behemoth. Together, they drag Hyun-soo to safety, but notice his darkened eyes, which suddenly fade. He asks them both for help as blood stains his mouth. Unfortunately, the blind gremlin monster from before returns, but the two kids manage to make it to safety before it reaches them. Both monsters start attacking one another, and with them distracted, the kids hurry up to room 1408. Unfortunately, they're not alone, as the giant beast chases after them, stalking ever closer. However, an unlikely ally comes in the form of Myung-suk, who shows up with her empty pram. She quickly receives a swift punch to the face for her troubles. With Myung-suk on the ground, a sweet moment of acceptance washes over her as she sees her smiling baby on the floor next to her. As she smiles weakly, this monster smashes a fist down into her body. The group works together and manages to distract the monster long enough to make it to Do-sik's apartment. A seemingly recovered Myung-suk makes it too, and also recovers from the same dark-eyed infection Hyun-soo had. Jae-hoon leads the large monster to the window, where it lunges at him and falls out to its doom. Presumably anyway. Sang-wook patches his shoulder as he checks the news and sees a broadcast about the current monster outbreak. Bleeding from the mouth, the president tries to keep order, but when he stumbles over and begins incoherently rambling, gunshots end the broadcast. Of course, this just causes more chaos. That chaos manifests itself in Suk-hyun locking himself inside the convenience store and refusing to let anyone else in. Well, the resident from room 802, the one beaten down by Sang-wook, shows up with a suitcase packed full of food. He distributes it to everyone, but blood staining the lining raises alarm bells for some of those he hands food to. In room 1408, the team has a brief respite and reflects on their time together, wondering exactly what they'll do next. Eventually, Hyun-soo admits that he's infected and makes a pact with Ji-soo that if either of them turns, they'll kill the other. They all survive the night as Eun-hyuk gets on the tannoy in the morning and tells them to head up to the first floor, where it's safe. Only Jin-ok sees her daughter running for the apartment block, which sends all the residents into a frenzy over what to do by the front doors. Suong rushes outside, but unfortunately, a whipping tentacle protrudes and impales both him and Jin-ok's daughter, draining their life force as they're left in a bloody heap in the group. With 2 people dead and the residents in turmoil, episode 4 begins with a grieving Jin-ok blaming Eun-hyuk for what's happened. He's clearly stunned too and struggles to keep the residents under control. Meanwhile, Ji-soo and Jae-hoon head out in the morning, armed with a makeshift shield made from a cupboard door to protect them. Just before they leave, Hyun-soo decides to join them as the 2 kids thank him for rescuing them. The date is August 18th and it's officially day 4 of confinement. The various residents all begin working together to bring makeshift boards and barricades for the doorways downstairs. Ji-kyung has a close encounter with a creature in the vents, reminiscent of the licker in Resident Evil. She manages to free herself from its monstrous tentacle, but finds herself stuck and away from her phone as Sang-won calls. She does make it back to Eun-hyuk, but berates him for knowing there was a monster lurking around. As she staggers away, air raid sirens wail as we hear more about what's happening around Korea. A news report confirms that the military will be in charge of all security and civil affairs from here on out. They're not quite sure how this infection has been spreading, but they do know some key details. These creatures have excellent regenerative capabilities, but the soldiers confirm there's a moment dubbed Golden Hour, where these creatures can be killed by incinerating them. Right now, this seems to be the only solution to stopping their threat. Survive! Good luck, the soldier remarks before the broadcast ends. Hyun-soo continues to have disturbing dreams before awakening in Eun-yu's room. Eun-hyuk's there too, and he warns Hyun-soo that things are going to be tough from here on out. That difficulty is compounded when he heads out to the main atrium where the rest of the residents are. Suk-hyun wants to expel Hyun-soo, seeing him as a threat to their survival, but they all eventually decide to vote on his fate. It goes right down to the wire until the final vote is declared invalid. And just like that, Suk-hyun gets infected and begins bleeding profusely from the nose. When he wakes up, he finds himself in isolation with Hyun-soo. Ji-kyung, meanwhile, suffers from an upset stomach. While she tries to make sense of what's been happening, Ji-soo comforts Jin-ok, who mourns the death of her daughter. Ji-soo heads into the bathroom and notices a baseball bat resting against the wall. This triggers memories of the past as we see that the boy lending her a helping hand is also the owner of the guitar. Back in the present, Sang-wook goes on the hunt and finds the room 802 resident he was torturing before. Sang-wook beats him down until the boy escapes, convincing the others to keep him locked up for now. This places him in the same room as Hyun-soo and Suk-hyun. He confronts Hyun-soo and asks him how he can transform into a monster like him as Hyun-soo begins to show signs of concern himself. Up in the apartments, Do-sik opens the bathroom door but finds a massive sack that seems to be holding a child inside. With his gun in hand, he remains shocked by what he's seen and deliberates over his next move. The 5th episode begins with Eun-hyuk calling for Hyun-soo and taking him out of isolation. It turns out that he's going to be doing all the dangerous work from now on, and that includes finding Do-sik and saving him from his predicament. As we cut back to Do-sik, he deliberates with the bathroom, a task made more difficult when he remembers Myung-suk's story about her daughter. Eventually, he decides to shut the door and stay put for now. Eun-hyuk eventually backs up Sang-won as he remains determined to head back into the main area of the apartment building. Opening the locked door, Hyun-soo holds back while Sang-wook goes on ahead. Eun-hyuk's words weigh heavily on him, especially as he tells Hyun-soo to rescue Do-sik and that the kids are secondary. It's pretty cold, but something that he collaborates with Eun-yu over, telling her that Hyun-soo may be their strongest weapon to use in this coming fight. It also turns out that the votes from before were completely legit and not at all staged like he initially intended to do. As they talk, Eun-hyuk mentions the Krukru blog he saw online, specifically a post about how this isn't really a disease, but actually a curse. Upstairs, Sang-wook and Hyun-soo work together to navigate through the burning rooms as a lightning-quick monster with a pulsing orange heart arrives and begins chasing them. Thankfully, our 2 new characters are on hand and enter the fray. A crossbow-wielding girl called Yuri and her elderly patient. Sang-wook heads up to room 802 and begins sifting through Seung-jae's belongings. Using the keys he swiped in the last episode, Sang-wook sees numerous pictures of different kids beaten and pictures of them up on the wall, a disgusting, twisted trophy cabinet. Now it becomes apparent exactly why this man was beaten as badly as he was. Hyun-soo, Ji-soo, and the old man make it to the apartment holding Do-sik. Inside, Hyun-suk sees the sack in the bathroom for himself and contemplates what to do next. Meanwhile, Sang-wook heads down to the basement but is blindsided by Seung-jae, who bashes him over the head with a hammer several times. Eventually, Seung-jae gets his just desserts as Sang-wook beats this man down to a pulp. Dragging his lifeless body to the front, he lifts up the shutters, drops the hammer, and proceeds to drag Seung-jae outside. He closes the shutters, but Yoon-hyuk is there, holding them back up to keep him in. In this courageous act, Sang-wook drags both Min-ju and Suong inside. There, the pair are given a proper burial as the residents join together and pay their respects. On the back of this, Yi-kyung decides to deal with her demons alone. As she heads out, the rest of the residents contemplate what it means to be human and whether this curse is just the next step in evolution. Episode 6 begins with a flashback to Sang-wook's past, specifically the moments he was hired to deal with Seung-jae. Although he initially refused, a photograph of a young girl and an impassioned, grief-stricken father were enough to sway his decision. In the present, Sang-wook wakes up with a start, holding Yuri by the neck. He soon lets go, but it's clear the team is divided on whether he should remain in the apartment block. Jin-ok expresses her gratitude, giving him a necklace as thanks. Sang-wook's final act to rid himself of Seung-jae's memory involves burying his keys in the dirt next to the two graves. Stricken with guilt for being paid to find the girl, Sang-wook even asks Jae-hoon to pray on his behalf. As most of the residents start building traps, Yi-kyung heads off alone. We flash back to June 2020, where she is seen working and flirting with chief physician Sang-won, who is her fiancé. Another flashback to July that same year shows Yi-kyung begging to re-enter a fire to search for victims. Denied, she resigns, handing in her badge. In the present, Yi-kyung races off on her bike while Yoon-hyuk and Jae-hoon sit and chat. Jae-hoon reveals he was once an alcoholic but turned to religion, which helped him through dark times, and more challenges lie ahead. The residents establish 3 survival rules: moving in pairs, checking temperatures every night at 8 p.m., and using Hyun-soo for errands. Do-sik is unhappy with how Hyun-soo is being exploited as a weapon. Suk-hyun starts transforming into a monster, his hair growing down to the floor. He shuffles forward, asking his wife, Sun-young, to kill him. She complies, attacking him with an iron pipe, releasing years of pent-up rage and abuse in a bloody act of revenge. Yi-kyung reaches Sang-won's office, only to discover that the Kru blog belongs to him. He has been documenting the curse, but before she can delve further, soldiers arrive, capturing her and taking her away. Back at the apartment, Hyun-soo continues to battle the demons within. When he wakes, Yoon-yu is watching over him, noticing the scars on his arms. She helps him patch up and leaves him with plasters to finish the job himself. Yoon-hyuk speaks to Hyun-soo about the monster situation, trying to figure out how long it takes to fully turn into a monster. Based on the Kru post, it appears to be 15 days. Meanwhile, Yi-kyung is suspended from the ceiling by soldiers who question her about what she read. She tries to negotiate, promising to show them someone resisting the transformation into a monster. Back in the apartment, Hyun-soo is losing his fight against the infection, transforming into a strange, oozing cocoon while hanging from the ceiling. The residents manage to knock him down, but their troubles are far from over. The lightning-fast, glowing creature from earlier escapes the traps and attacks the group in the basement. The liquor-like creature from previous episodes makes a return, chasing one of the kids through the hallways. Do-sik arrives, ready to fire with his weapon. Episode 7 wastes absolutely no time as we kick off right where we left off. 2 exciting action set pieces ensue, one featuring the group in the parking lot and another with Do-sik upstairs. Downstairs, the group bundle into a car and take off as numerous creatures surround them. Jae-hoon and Ji-soo work together while Yoon-hyuk drives. Gil-seob and his flamethrower are enough to thwart the threat though, as the place ignites into a fiery tomb of screaming monsters. Upstairs, Yoon-yu rallies the troops and tells them they need to work together and use traps to try and thwart the threat. While they do, Do-sik does his best to hold off the creature on top of him, which sees a sharp tentacle impale his leg for his troubles. With a flaming Molotov in hand, the group burns the creature long enough for Do-sik to crawl away to safety and Hyun-soo to jump in and electrocute the creature with his spear. After saving their lives, the group are a bit more appreciative of Hyun-soo, apologizing for locking him up initially. Meanwhile, Yuri speaks to Sang-wook, who eventually swallows his pride and allows her to tend to his wounds. He's in a really bad way too, especially when he lifts his shirt to show the crimson mess of blood and green tape. Afterward, the group all sit down to eat, but tellingly, Hyun-soo and Sang-wook take themselves away from the main rabble of residents. Gil-seop joins them, though. He shows off the scar across his stomach and tries to find common ground with the duo. It seems to do the trick, as the pair sit cross-legged and eat. With the water tank contaminated, the group realize they've got some serious problems. Down in the basement, Yoon Hyuk and Do Sik examine the damage to their car and try to concoct a plan to venture outside and grab resources before it's too late. Unfortunately, panic and fear consume Seung-won as he begins maniacally screaming and despairing about their situation. Thankfully, Gil-seop manages to talk some sense into him, followed by a swift punch from Sang-wook too. While all this is going on, Ji-kyung is cut loose from her ordeal by the soldiers. She's told that those who survive the monster infection are known as special infectees. Back in the apartment complex, the group band together and put their plan into action. It's the proverbial calm before the storm though, as all our residents prepare to head outside. Jisoo plays her guitar while Hyun-soo listens. Jae-hoon drinks soju while Sang-wook apologizes to Seung-won for hitting him. Unfortunately, Jisoo takes a turn for the worst not long after and collapses. It turns out that she has appendicitis. She needs surgery, and with very little in the way of sterile equipment or a doctor on scene, things look bleak. Yuri volunteers to help though, as the group prepares for surgery. Outside the room, Yoon Hyuk warns Hyun-soo that if things go sideways, then he's to head off and get the resources they need. The group is essentially now split into two, with most of the residents hanging back to try and save Jisoo. As Hyun-soo bundles in the reinforced car, he remembers key moments from his past, a childhood full of bullying and regret. Despite the bullying stopping when his father got involved, his old friend blamed him for his woes, which is why Hyun-soo took a Stanley knife to his wrist. He was racked with guilt and believed he had nothing to live for. In the present, Hyun-soo readies himself to face the outside world, but a giant creature slams into the side of the car and knocks it over. Realizing their plan is a bust, Episode 8 begins with Hyun-soo awakening to find the towering behemoth back and angrier than ever. Gil-seop does his best to help, throwing a Molotov at the creature until he begins bleeding from the nose. This creature towers over them both as Gil-seop looks set to meet a grisly end. Thankfully, he survives courtesy of Ji-kyung ramming it with a fire truck. That's not the end of it though, as the creature tries to tip the truck over and crush her. Sang-wook does his best to free Yuri from the car, while Ji-kyung serves as the distraction needed to save the others to scramble to safety. With the creature suffering serious burns, Ji-kyung rams it repeatedly with the fire engine and manages to save the day. Back inside, Jae-hoon keeps watch while Yoon Hyuk completes his surgery and leaves her fate up to Jisoo herself. With the threat outside gone, the team head back in as Ji-kyung's fire truck supplies crucial fresh water for the group. Gil-seop berates Yuri for heading out, although thanks to Ji-kyung, she now has an inhaler. Jae-hoon, meanwhile, slips back into old habits and continues to drink. Sang-wook knows all about demons, though, and sits opposite to him, convincing Jae-hoon not to give up hope. When Hyun-soo awakens, Ji-kyung confronts him and asks exactly when his first symptoms occurred. He tells her he just wanted to live. It's certainly ironic given what he's been through and his desire to voluntarily leave his life in the past. Eventually, Ji-kyung admits she ran into soldiers and told them about Hyun-soo too, hence the questions. Afterwards, she has a shower where guilt threatens to consume her. The soldiers promise to let her go and reveal more about Sang-won in exchange for bringing Hyun-soo to them. After giving her a tracker to hone in on their location, they allowed her to leave, given Hyun-soo may be the key to their survival. When Sun-young reveals that she's infected, the group unanimously votes to keep her inside. There's a sense of comradeship between these survivors now, but the residents do put her in isolation just to be on the safe side. With Sun-young gone for now, the rest of the residents tell each other scary stories. Unfortunately, a runaway soldier shows up in the apartment block and begins convulsing and coughing up blood. Away from the drama though, Hyun-soo talks openly to Eun-yu, who admits she's given up ballet and teaches him how to do her hand gesture from before. This small act of kindness is enough for Hyun-soo to begin cutting his hair. It's a symbolic gesture, one signifying him cutting away all the pain and grief he's felt over the years. Jisoo awakens from surgery, safe and sound, which is one positive to come from this situation. However, the group has a bigger fish to fry. The soldier wakes up and we learn he is called Ju-sung. He's clearly in shock, and as his radio crackles into life, he begins growing more and more erratic. Realizing that their SOS message may not be such a good idea, Sang-wook and Hyun-soo head up and cut it loose. On their way back down, they see the security guard in the elevator heading down with a weapon in hand. Hyun-soo charges down too and tries to stop him as flies swarm all around his face. Thankfully, Jae-hoon is there to stop him as the two square off. Unfortunately, Jae-hoon loses his arm in the ensuing skirmish. With the blade of his sword severed too, Jae-hoon stumbles forward and grabs a security guard, stabbing him in the chest and holding him back from the others. Sacrificing himself, he grabs the guard and keeps it at bay in the lift, asking the others to throw the fire in. Eventually, Eun-hyuk does just that as Jae-hoon dies in the fire. The 9th episode begins with Ji-soo grappling with grief over Jae-hoon's death. His last words to her, expressing his feelings, weigh heavily on her. Yoon-yu tries to lift her spirits by bringing chocolates and offering encouragement. Ji-soo's struggle highlights her vulnerability, and Yoon-yu's support becomes crucial in helping her move forward. As Ji-soo begins to recover physically, Sun-young counts down the remaining days until her infection worsens, indicating just how dire the situation is. Gil-seob proposes finding an underground bunker, suggesting a possible escape from their current predicament. However, time passes, and Ji-kyung remains hesitant about using her tracker, which could lead them to safety or further danger. A truck crashes into the apartment complex, releasing armed men who begin hunting the residents. Gil-seob is taken but manages to protect the kids by hiding them in the vents. The remaining residents are captured and imprisoned, with a chilling reminder of the consequences for disobedience when Ji-yoon is shot. Young-sop, the leader of the invaders, reveals his twisted perspective on humanity. His recounting of finding a church full of bodies underscores his belief that humans are the real monsters. His cruel actions reinforce his malevolent nature and set the stage for a confrontation. Ji-kyung and Sang-wook take a stand against the soldiers, managing to kill a few and arm themselves. They orchestrate a daring escape, with the residents fighting back against their captors. Hyun-soo leads a charge but faces a critical moment when Young-seop holds Yoon-hyuk at gunpoint. Sun-young's unexpected return leads to a shocking twist as she stabs Hyun-soo and is subsequently engulfed in flames. Hyun-soo is then taken away in a lift, leaving the remaining residents to fend for themselves. Ji-kyung's quick thinking helps free the others from captivity. Hyun-soo finds himself on the rooftop, only to be shot again by Young-seop. The true leader of the criminals emerges, revealing Young-seop as merely a pawn. This new antagonist, the Wolf, offers a deal to Hyun-soo as a military helicopter flies overhead, signaling the possibility of external help. The episode ends with Hyun-soo preparing to rejoin the rest of the residents as the lift descends, setting up a new phase of survival and conflict. The emergence of the true leader introduces a fresh dynamic to the ongoing struggle. The season finale kicks off with Hyun-soo arriving with the hooded figure from the elevator. The standoff is tense, but Hyun-soo's declaration that the criminal is the same as him helps diffuse immediate threats. Hyun-soo inspects Sun-young's body and reflects on the circumstances leading to her death, revealing that he fired the fatal shot. The conversation reveals a dire military plan known as Operation Golden Hour. If the military deems hope lost, they are authorized to eliminate everyone, both humans and monsters, on sight. This grim strategy underscores the urgency and desperation of their situation. Eun-hyuk and Yoon-yeol grapple with whether to use the military leaflet to betray Hyun-soo for their own survival. Eun-hyuk suspects it's a trap and tries unsuccessfully to warn Hyun-soo. Meanwhile, Yi-kyung shows Eun-hyuk the tracker she has been hesitating to use. Sang-wook rushes Yuri to safety, but the hooded figure's escape attempt leads to chaos. A barrage of bullets in a confrontation with Byung-il ensue, with Ji-kyung's efforts to fight back proving only partially effective. Hyun-soo, overwhelmed by the infection, transforms and battles the intruders. Do-sik sacrifices himself to help Hyun-soo regain control, leading to a poignant and emotional moment of reconciliation between them. With Do-sik's death, Hyun-soo's memories seem to fade, introducing the amnesia trope. The emotional impact is profound, especially as Ji-soo and Sang-wook face their own fates. Gil-seob's final act of kindness, bringing a gift to the children, is a touching moment. Yuri discovers Gil-seob has passed away, adding to the sense of loss. As the snow turns into a blizzard, the army surrounds the apartment complex, intensifying the residents' struggle. Hyun-soo chooses to head outside despite the group's attempts to keep him in. Eun-hyuk makes a heroic sacrifice to help his sister and Hyun-soo, a final act of defiance that underscores his commitment to family. In the underground bunker, the group faces new challenges as grenades are set off and the military begins firing. Bomb leads the group to safety through the vents and they emerge into a changed world. The survivors face a new threat. The soldiers are poised to take them to a survival camp. Ji-kyung remains behind to ensure the others' safety, leaving them with a message to survive. As the episode concludes, a battered Hyun-soo awakens in a truck, facing a figure who appears to be Sang-wook driving. The ambiguity of whether it is truly Sang-wook or someone else adds a layer of suspense and intrigue.